Okay, let's get this seat assembly finished and back on the bike. I finished off the last video awaiting some stainless steel sheet to make some new parts for the seat latch. Checking with my calipers, the main part is just under 2 mm thick and approximately 15 mm wide, although I don't think I need to get too precise with these parts. I do now have a small sheet of 2 mm stainless, so armed with an angle grinder and a cutting disc, I cut off a couple of strips and clean up the rough edges in my mill and using some files and emery. The part that pokes out from under the seat has two offset sections, one for the overlap with the other part and the other for the handle. The first is easy enough to shape using some offcuts of steel and G-clamps. The handle is a bit more of a challenge, but again I managed to set the bends using pieces of scrap, G-clamps and my vise. Each part has a pivot hole and a further hole in one part and a slot in the other for where they connect. In what will now likely become the most over-engineered part of the restored bike, I make a couple of brackets from brass to replace the original parts, and rather than rely on rivets, I thread the brackets and use stainless screws throughout. To connect the two parts of the latch together, I use an M4 screw, a couple of washers, and a nylock nut. The securing screws for the brackets are Allen cap, but with quite a low profile, so not a lot different than the original rivets. Like the latch, the seat prop appears to be made from mild steel, which does show some evidence of paint, but most of that has long gone. I'll make a new one using some 5 mm stainless steel bar. To form the shape, I make a simple jig, apply some heat, and with a bit of help from my hammer, bend it to shape. Continuing with the over-engineering, we also make the hinge and the catch from brass. To refit the mounting bracket to the seat base, I use new stainless bolts with large rubber washers and penny washers on the top side, and washers and nylon nuts on the underside. For the pivot points with the frame, there are a pair of conical rubbers and a steel sleeve on each side. The rubbers are hard and cracked, so I leave them to soak in a mix of isopropyl alcohol and winter greens, which softens them up nicely. A word of warning on this approach, as I have found that it does lead to a slight swelling of the parts, which is not an issue in this case. The sleeves clean up quite nicely. I guess the compressed rubbers protecting them from the UK winters. And of course I use new stainless fasteners. The seat-based rubbers are also hard and cracked, so I give them the same treatment as the pivot rubbers to soften them up. As they will be a little bit more visible, I also give them a coating of back to black. When refitting the cushion to the base, I do of course fit new stainless fasteners along with the new washers I previously made. These three large diameter washers are not original parts, so they can go into the bin, but I do add an additional thick washer to each bolt to give the seat a bit more pressure upwards against the latch. Before refitting the light unit, I add the wiring. There are three wires: the feed for the rear light, the feed for the brake light, and the common ground. I did initially use a length of standard 1.5mm 3-core flex, but it was too thick, so I stripped off the sheath and replaced it with some heat shrink. As we saw in the last video, the original spacers were junk, so I turned up some new ones from stainless steel and again used stainless bolts. The two rubber washers should ensure that the unit is not rigidly fixed to the base to give some isolation for any vibrations, although I am now using LED bulbs, which I assume shouldn't be quite so susceptible to vibration. The routing of this cable is bonkers, totally exposed to anything and everything that the back wheel throws up off the road. I also now realise that I should have blocked up those superfluous holes when I repaired the seat base. Oh well. To give the wiring a bit more protection, I add an additional layer of heat shrink to the most exposed section and use a nylon cable clip to hold it in position. I will deal with those errant holes when I get the various parts painted, not least as they are routed to the back of the light unit for any water that the rear wheel flings up. I dealt with the pivot rubbers and sleeves earlier in the video, so it's just a case of bolting the whole unit back onto the frame. I've not yet dealt with the rear indicators, which are mounted off the mudguard and will need some fresh holes drilling. The ones that came with the bike are not original items, and I'm sure that finding new original parts will be up there with finding rocking horse scrap and hen's teeth. Thanks for watching.